Hello, hello. Welcome, welcome. Today, I'm here to show you my next new project here. Once again, very small game here, but I have dubbed it A Flower for Papa. This is a very different and interesting game from my other games that I've published so far, because of the fact it's very much more artistic in nature, and that's based on the game jam I have decided to join and work on this game for, which is based off of Dia de los Muertos and remembering those who have passed. So I wanted to work a lot harder on the different more storytelling elements and more of the quality of life stuff that could really help the game in some ways. So let's get into it. So first off, I have created a small player here, and this is pretty much the extent of my animation skills so far. It is a very simple but very effective is what I'd call it, I guess, walking animation that generally fits what I was going for this effect. It wasn't supposed to be too terribly hard to make, and it really wasn't, but I wanted to work a little harder on making this art and animation usually better than it is. I'm not usually an art person, so this is a bit of a stretch for me in terms of its range. Another thing I've worked on is creating a arrow indication effect. It's not perfect, as you can see right here. It automatically disappears instead of fading out like it usually does over here. And I've also created one for over here as well. And then I've also created a pseudo puzzle element that kind of works. So if I press the button and I have not picked up the flower, that flower you can pick up, by the way, it automatically displays the message that do not forget the flower. And you can continue to repeat this message as long as you need until you figure out, oh hey, I need to pick up the flower. And a same arrow indication comes up here, and you can pick up the flower as it fades away. And you can open the door, have the screen fade out. And that's about as far as I have gotten in terms of what I've actually accomplished here today. As I reload this page, you can also see I have created a fade-in effect. And this art is generally more to look okay and it's not supposed to look super great, as it is a slow look at of my art abilities. But it is mostly to help out and give some sort of atmosphere instead of just like losing it all completely. Now, this is not a perfect game right now, and I don't believe it'll ever be a perfect game. I think I won't be able to easily fix these bugs here. But generally, if I press against this table, I start spazzing like a wild Temmie from Undertale. The arrow effect, as I already preluded, kind of disappears randomly if I stay too long in a spot, like here. But I'm generally proud of what I've accomplished here today, and I'm very much likely to create a part 2 of this once I get a chance next week to work on this. So, real quick, I want to go into more of the more in-depth stuff and see how this game actually works in terms of its mechanics inside of Construct 2. So I will be right back. Alrighty, this is about what I have accomplished in terms of the Construct 2, and this is what my current Construct 2 layout looks like right now. There are multiple objects with the fade-in behavior here to help add the extra effect instead of just like popping into existence and then popping right out. And the fade-in gives a much more subtle and gentle feel to the entire experience as I have right now. For example, this text, which displays that don't reflect the flower, it has a very nice and simple fade-in effect to it. This, which is actually one of the most complicated objects, my interact arrow, which shows when you can interact with something by pressing the up arrow, it also has a fade-in effect, although it's much more diverse in its nature. This flower, which is my main object for this current layout right now, has a fade-out object from once it is interacted with. And I also have a fade-in black object here, which lets me show the entirety of, which lets me fade in and fade out of this layout. This also has a fade-in behavior, which I can use to give those fade-in and fade-out effects. Going into the more specific events and variables and the scripting of it, quotation marks, it mostly doesn't really have to do much with the player. It's very basic player stuff, which is based on if it's moving or not, if he is moving or not, which triggers the animations, when he mirrors at all, if he mirrors at all, and generally enabling and disabling it for the other parts of it. This character is not supposed to be able to actually do much, as it's more rooted in real-world application in terms of what it can actually do. So I'm more focused on the different events that go outside of the player's reach. For example, as I mentioned, the interact arrow is a very important object as it triggers a lot of different things. And I've actually used, if I may go back to this layout for it, 2 different detect objects. This door detect, which detects if the player's inside the door, and causing this arrow to appear. And then I've also used a table detect object, which detects whether or not you're within the range of this table. Oop, yes, is it here? Here, fixed. But it generally these 2 objects detect whether or not you're in its range, and let this arrow come up to mess around with this, to go above the player's head and signify. And that's another thing I've also worked on, is that whenever the arrow actually appears, it appears over the player's head and stays over the player's head as long as they're within the area, and then it does fade out, although this is a very flawed method in terms of its actual application. And a lot of the scenarios that occur thanks to the interact arrow are very dependent on what other things are there. For example, I have created a global variable called the pretty much number of flowers that you have, and since you have 0 flowers at the beginning of the layout and you need the flower to technically leave the room, because you have no flowers and you're overlapping with door detect, it automatically causes that door reject text to spawn and say, "Don't forget the flower." It obviously has to wait 4 seconds, and you can repeat it as need be, but as long as you don't have the flower, and your flower variable stays at 0, you cannot leave the room. And also, if your flower is on screen and you're at the table detect, the flower fades away, and it automatically sets your flower to 1. And it only works when the flower is on screen, meaning that you can't immediately change. You can't immediately just press it again and again and again to change your flower value. And it automatically sets your flower value to 1, meaning you can't add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on and so forth, to skew with the results. And once again, because I did have a little bit of trouble causing this, but the system only lets you actually go through the door via door detect and pressing the up arrow once you have actually finished, once you have actually collected the flower, and once your flower value is at 1. And finally, just as a little showcase, I have the fade in black here. It's actually just a 1x1 object. It's a very small object, but what it does is at the start of the layout, it automatically changes its position to 0, 0, and sets its size to the size of the layout to create the object and make the fade in effect look real. And once you leave the layout, it automatically does it pretty much sets it so it doesn't fade in, but it fades in, causing the screen to go black, and then it waits to go to the next layout, pretty much. And during all of this, the player is actually disabled in terms of its actual platform ability, so at the beginning of the layout, once the fade-in occurs, it automatically enables the platform, and once the up arrow is pressed and you can leave, then it disables it to let the fade-in occur without the player moving in the background very awkwardly. And that is generally the extent of the work that I have done here. I have not really worked on this town. As you can see, it is pretty much an entirely white background because I have yet to start it. But it should not be too hard once I have got these general variables down with it. And since I finished the house, I feel like this will pick up much smoother once I get some real nice art going onto it. Alrighty then, that is all I have for you today, so I plan to work on this more in the future, but thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this final product when it is finally made, and I hope you enjoy this video. Thank you so much for watching.